There's a phase in chronic illness that nobody talks about. Not the diagnosis, not the collapse, not even the disease. I'm talking about the whispers before the storm. The years where your body is trying to tell you something, but nothing makes sense yet. The headaches, the exhaustion, the random pain, the dizziness, the brain fog, the gut issues, the feeling that something is deeply wrong, while everyone around you is saying you're probably just stressed. That phase changes people. Because when your body starts breaking down slowly, you start questioning yourself before the system. And that's what this episode is about. This is the whispers before the storm. And if you've ever felt like your body was screaming while the world kept whispering over you, this episode is for you. Looking back now, I can see the whispers clearly. But when you're living inside that storm in real time, they don't feel connected. They feel random. 1 week is exhaustion, the next week is dizziness, then headaches, then digestive issues, then waking up feeling like your body feels like 1,000 pounds. And the hardest part, life doesn't stop while this is happening. You still have responsibilities, still have bills, still have family, still have people expecting the same version of you that they've always known. So you start adapting quietly. You drink more caffeine, push through fatigue, pretend you're okay, laugh things off, tell yourself maybe you just need rest. But deep down, you know something feels off. Not dramatic, not attention seeking, just off. And there's something incredibly isolating about sensing your body changing before anyone else can see it. Before Unhinged N Loud existed, before the advocacy, before the frameworks, before the education tools, there was confusion. I didn't wake up one day with a diagnosis written across my forehead. It happened slowly. That's what people don't understand about autoimmune disease. It rarely arrives like lightning. It arrives like static. Tiny interruptions, small changes, little things you brush off because life is busy and responsibilities don't stop. You're tired, but everybody's tired. Your joints hurt, but maybe you slept wrong. You're forgetting things, but maybe you're overwhelmed. You're bloated, but maybe it's just stress. You're dizzy, but maybe you didn't eat enough. Everything has an explanation, until eventually, none of the explanations make sense anymore. The invisible phase is brutal, because this is the phase where you still look functional to everyone else. You're still going to work, still answering texts, still showing up, still smiling in public, but privately, your body is beginning to betray you. And one of the hardest things about chronic illness is realizing that your suffering can be invisible even to the ones closest to you. People measure illness by visibility. If they can't see it, they struggle to understand it. But autoimmune disease doesn't always announce itself dramatically. Sometimes it erodes you quietly. And the quiet erosion is dangerous because it teaches you to minimize your own pain. Working in healthcare changed the way I viewed illness completely because I saw how fast environments move. I saw how overloaded the system becomes. I saw how patients can intentionally become reduced to numbers, charts, timelines, and quick decisions. And I also saw fear. Patients walking in terrified because they knew something was wrong but didn't know how to explain it. Some people had symptoms nobody could identify immediately. Some had chronic pain with no visible explanation. Some had already been dismissed multiple times before even arriving there. And what stayed with me wasn't just the medical side. It was the emotional side. The look people get when they feel unheard. The exhaustion of repeating symptoms over and over. The hopelessness that starts forming when nobody connects the dots. That changes you when you witness it firsthand. One of the most damaging parts of this journey is what happens to patients when they finally seek help. You gather the courage. You explain symptoms. You hope somebody will connect the dots. And instead, you leave appointments feeling smaller than when you arrived. Maybe your labs are normal. Maybe your symptoms don't fit neatly into one specialty. Maybe nobody explains inflammation patterns. Maybe nobody investigates further. So patients start hearing things like, "You're anxious. You should exercise more. You're probably depressed. You just need better sleep." Now let me be clear. Mental health matters. Stress affects the body. But there's a difference between considering mental health and dismissing legitimate physical suffering. And too many patients know the difference intimately. There are moments people never forget. Moments where you finally build up the courage to explain what's happening, only to feel embarrassed for even speaking up. And dismissal doesn't always sound cruel. Sometimes it sounds casual. Your labs are fine. You're probably just stressed. Maybe it's anxiety. Try getting more sleep. But what people don't understand is that repeated dismissal slowly disconnects patients from trusting themselves. You start second guessing your own body. You wonder, am I overreacting? Am I imagining this? Am I becoming obsessed with symptoms? That psychological damage is real because eventually patients just stop asking for help altogether. And not because symptoms disappear, but because hopelessness grows louder than hope. This is the phase where people start researching at night, at 2 a.m., in bed, exhausted, scrolling symptom forms, reading lab languages, trying to connect patterns. Not because they want attention, not because they're dramatic, but because they're desperate. People don't understand how terrifying it is to feel your body changing while nobody can explain why. So patients become investigators. And honestly, that's part of why Unhinged N Loud was born. Because I realized patients were being forced to educate themselves just to survive the healthcare system. One of the scariest things for patients is hearing everything looks normal. Because on paper, that should feel reassuring. But when your body feels like it's collapsing, those words can feel terrifying instead. Not because patients want something to be wrong, but because unexplained suffering creates fear. People start thinking, well, if labs are normal, then why do I feel this way? And this is where many autoimmune patients fall into the gap between symptoms and diagnosis, because inflammation patterns don't always appear immediately. Autoimmune disease can evolve slowly. Some conditions fluctuate. Some labs require timing. Some patients don't fit the textbook presentations early on. And patients are often navigating all this while still trying to survive everyday life. One symptom alone may not tell the whole story, but patterns do. That's the part that changed everything for me. I started realizing autoimmune disease isn't usually one isolated symptom. It's a storm moving through the entire body. Fatigue, brain fog, joint pain, digestive issues, hormonal shifts, hair loss, inflammation, dizziness, food sensitivities, different systems, same storm. And when you begin recognizing patterns instead of isolated symptoms, you stop feeling crazy. And one thing I became deeply interested in was understanding inflammation, not obsessively, not fearfully, but educationally. Because inflammation is often the language the body speaks before larger diagnoses emerge. Markers like CRP, ESR, ferritin patterns, vitamin deficiencies, hormonal shifts. These things matter. Not because labs alone tell the whole story, but because patterns matter. And that realization became one of the foundations behind the education side of Unhinged N Loud, helping people understand that symptoms aren't always random chaos. Sometimes they're connected signals. One of the first moments many patients finally feel seen happens online, not in an exam room, not in a textbook, not in a diagnosis, but in a comment section. Someone describing symptoms you thought only you experienced. Someone explaining fatigue the exact way you feel it. Someone talking about brain fog, inflammation, dizziness, gut issues, chronic pain. And suddenly you realize, I'm not alone. That kind of validation can be life-changing, because community restores something that dismissal tries to destroy: your sense of reality. Chronic illness changes relationships in ways people rarely talk about. Not everyone understands invisible illness. Some people understand pain when they can physically see it. And when you cancel plans enough times, when your energy changes, when you stop showing up the same way, some relationships shift. Some people drift away. Not because they're bad people. Sometimes because they simply don't understand what chronic illness actually does to someone mentally, emotionally, physically, and financially. And honestly, that grief deserves more conversation, because there is a loneliness that comes with realizing people miss the old version of you while you're grieving that version of you too. There's a level of exhaustion and chronic illness that creates that sleep alone cannot fix. And I'm not just talking about physical exhaustion. I'm talking about the exhaustion of explaining yourself constantly, explaining fatigue, explaining cancellations, explaining symptoms, explaining brain fog, explaining why your body changes day to day. Eventually, people stop talking because explaining becomes too exhausting, and isolation grows quietly. You begin feeling disconnected from healthy people because they can't fully relate. But you also feel disconnected from yourself because your old normal no longer exists. That emotional burnout is real. And people deserve space to talk about it honestly. Nobody prepares patients for the emotional grief of losing the version of yourself that existed before illness. You grieve energy. You grieve normalcy. You grieve spontaneity. You grieve relationships. You grieve trust in your own body. And some people around you just don't understand why you've changed. But chronic illness changes people. Pain changes people. Dismissal changes people. Survival changes people. And eventually, you either silence yourself to make others comfortable, or you become louder. When I started creating advocacy tools, it came from frustration. I realized patients were carrying massive amounts of information in their heads. Their symptoms, their lab results, patterns, questions, medications, appointments, flares. And many people were trying to explain years of symptoms inside 15-minute appointments. That is overwhelming for patients. So I started thinking, how do we make this easier? How do we organize information? How do we help people communicate more clearly? How do we help patients recognize patterns earlier? That thinking eventually evolved into advocacy tools, symptom trackers, frameworks, and educational systems connected to Unhinged N Loud. Symptom tracking isn't about obsession, it's about clarity. Because memory becomes unreliable when you're exhausted, inflamed, overwhelmed, or cognitively burnt out. Patterns get missed, triggers get forgotten, timelines blur together. But tracking can reveal connections people otherwise wouldn't notice, like your food reactions, stress patterns, hormonal timing, flare cycles, environmental triggers, and sleep disruption. And sometimes those patterns become the missing pieces patients need during medical conversations. There's usually a moment where patients stop waiting for permission to trust themselves. That moment changes everything. For some people, it's worsening symptoms. For others, it's finally finding the right doctor. For some, it's realizing they've been dismissed for years. But eventually, many patients reach a breaking point where they say, no, something is wrong. That moment is powerful because self-advocacy often begins before validation arrives. One of the deepest parts of chronic illness is identity loss. People talk about symptoms, but they don't talk enough about mourning who you used to be. The energetic version of you, the spontaneous version, the productive version, the version that didn't calculate energy before every decision. Chronic illness forces people to rebuild themselves psychologically. And rebuilding yourself while grieving yourself is incredibly difficult. but it can also create something powerful, like self-awareness, empathy, advocacy, purpose, depth. Sometimes survival changes people into voices the world desperately needs. Unhinged N Loud was never just about content. It came from watching people fall through the cracks. Not just online, not just personally, but firsthand. I worked in healthcare. I saw overwhelmed systems. I saw patients struggling to be heard. I saw fear. I saw dismissal. I saw confusion and realized something. Patients needed education in plain language, not fear, not impossible medical jargon, not shame, but education, pattern recognition, advocacy, tools, a community, because no one should have to feel alone while trying to understand their own body. The mission of Unhinged N Loud is simple. Help people understand patterns, help patients feel less alone, help people advocate earlier, help people ask better questions, help bridge the gap between symptoms and understanding. Not fear, not pretending to diagnose strangers online, not replacing doctors, but education, because education changes outcome. If you're still searching for answers right now, I want you to know something. You are not failing because you don't fully understand your body yet. The healthcare system is complicated. Autoimmune disease is complicated. Inflammation is complicated. And sometimes people spend years trying to connect dots that were never even explained properly. So give yourself grace. Keep learning. Keep documenting. Keep asking questions. Keep paying attention to patterns. Keep advocating for yourself respectfully but confidently, because your symptoms deserve curiosity, not shame. And even if your story feels lonely right now, you are not walking through this alone anymore. If you're in the whisper phase right now, I need you to hear this clearly. You are not weak for noticing changes in your body. You are not dramatic for asking questions. You are not too much for wanting answers. Your body speaks in patterns before it screams in emergencies. And sometimes the whispers before the storm are the most important warnings we will ever receive. This is why I created Unhinged N Loud. Because too many people are suffering silently while trying to convince the world that what they feel is real. And maybe, just maybe, your story doesn't end in dismissal. Maybe your story becomes advocacy, community, healing, awareness. Maybe your voice was never the problem. Maybe nobody was listening. This has been the Whispers Before the Storm from the Unhinged N Loud Advocacy Series.